Hello, and welcome to the session, The Business Imperative of DEI&B, the Key to Continued Innovation, with Brian Reeves and Sue Collard. Let's get this session started. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Brian Reeves and Sue Collard.
Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with my colleague and friend, Sue Collard, to speak with you about one of our favorite topics and hopefully yours as well, which is the business imperative of belonging, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We thought we'd start by introducing ourselves, so I'll start. I have the great pleasure of being the Chief Belonging, Diversity, and Equity Officer at UKG, but my story starts a long way ago with these embarrassing photos. I was born in the 60s in South Central Los Angeles, raised by a single mom, but I was inspired even back then by the civil rights movement, as well as the landing of Apollo 11 on the moon. A lot of people in my environment, quite honestly, did not make it past their 18th birthday, either incarcerated or on the earth. But due to the love of my family and their investment in me, I was able to attend UCLA, study math and computer science, and that changed everything for me and my family, and hopefully for generations to come. I interned as a software engineer after my sophomore year at Xerox Corporation. And that really fed that innovation spirit in me. And that actually launched a career of over 20 years in the Silicon Valley at large companies, but also at 14 years in the Silicon Valley doing startups. That last startup was acquired by SAP in 2009, and I was still doing engineering things, leading development teams in a number of areas. But along that entire journey, I always was intrigued at what it would take for me to do things that would enable other individuals to have the same type of life outcomes that mine was having. So I was actually doing this job way before I formally did the job. And in 2016, the then CEO of SAP asked me to actually join his office because he saw that I was approaching this topic like an engineer. I was testing things, I was engaging, I was trying to be very innovative. I did that for about 18 months and thank goodness for me, I got a call from Dell Technologies, and Michael Dell was looking for someone with my background approaching it from that business imperative. So I joined Dell about 3.5 years ago. I had the great honor of leading the topic and hopefully changing Dell's trajectory in this area. But ultimately, I wanted to get back to a smaller company. I wanted to get back to a company that was rooted in this space. And about 6 months ago, I had the great privilege of joining UKG in the role I spoke about, but also as an executive committee member. And we're focused now on driving strategies and tactics that will change not only UKG's outcomes, but hopefully the outcomes of all, and we'll explore that a bit. So with that, I want to hand it over to Sue.
Great, thanks, Brian. Hello, everyone. So excited to be here with you today, chatting about this very important topic. So a little bit about me, I tend to say that I'm a lifelong marketer, meaning that I have actually been in marketing type roles up until moving into the diversity, equity, and inclusion space just a few years ago. I started my career on the ad agency side, where I stayed for several years until I decided to start a family. And when I started to have a family, I decided to start my own business. So I had the great opportunity of working with large and small, medium businesses with their marketing strategy, developing their marketing strategy. And, once my kiddos got into kindergarten, that was when I decided, okay, I'm going to head back into the workforce full time. And instead of joining the agency side, I decided to jump over to corporate. And so I started at a startup called EqualLogic in Nashua, New Hampshire. Some of you may know EqualLogic. And I was at EqualLogic leading the field marketing organization when we were acquired by Dell in 2007. So overnight, I went from working for a 500-person company, which was the largest company that I had ever worked for, to working for a 150,000-person company. So big change, but incredibly grateful for that opportunity. I had lots of different opportunities during my 16 years at Dell. And so again, all of those roles at Dell were in marketing. And my last role in marketing was really focused on talent and where we are acquiring marketing talent, developing that talent, and then what are we doing to retain that talent. And so had programs supporting each one of those areas. And it was during this time that I had the opportunity to experience firsthand what happens when you bring a set of diverse individuals together. And the innovation, the engagement, the productivity that I saw firsthand was completely off the charts. And after leading that organization for 8 years, I said, I was looking for other opportunities just to stretch my skills in a different area. And I was honored to be asked to join our D&I organization under who at the time was our new Chief D&I Officer, Brian Reeves. And so I worked with Brian for about 3.5 years, building out the new D&I practice at Dell. And I say new because Brian really brought a different lens to how we were looking at D&I at the company. And so worked with Brian on building out a strategy, how the organization was structured, messaging, programs, et cetera. And so when Brian left several months ago, I stayed in touch with Brian and really was impressed with the opportunity that he had in front of him at UKG. And so I actually started to have conversations with Aaron and Chris and others at UKG, and was offered a role there leading up their strategy and operations for the BD&E team. So super grateful to be here with Brian, and I just finished up month 4, so a lot of fun ahead here. So back to you, Brian.
Awesome, Sue. So let's dive into it, where we speak about, why is our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging a business imperative? And Sue and I have discussed this a lot over the years, and we wanted to share at least some of our thoughts with you. So Sue, why don't you kick it off here?
Yeah, so as we've, talked about, Brian and I, in the past, the world is changing all around us. And there are certainly aspects of that change that we can control, and some that we can't control. And so I'm going to talk about some of those things that we can control. And so there are changes on a number of dimensions. One of those dimensions is generationally. And so the vast majority of the workforce very soon will be made up of the millennial generation, of which already represents about 40% of the consumers today. And those consumers have a spending power that is 1.4 trillion in the US alone. So it's hard to imagine, like, what is that going to be in 4 short years when we do hit that 75%? And these individuals, they want to be doing business with companies that align with their values, where they can see themselves in that company. And a lot of times when the people think of the millennials, they are thinking about, okay, they're at a younger age. The oldest millennial is actually 40 years old. And so they are absolutely in influential positions right now. So it's really important for us to keep in mind these various generations that we have in the workforce today. The next area that is changing in a big way is gender diversity. And so we've almost always had a balance when we look at gender across the world. However, what is changing is women are growing in power. More women are moving into more senior level positions in the workforce. And certainly their global spending power is growing, which grew to an amazing 32 trillion last year. So again, similar to what we talked about with the generations, women want to be working with companies where they can see themselves, where they can see their values inside of that company. And so last but not least, the world is changing from an ethnic and cultural perspective. Ethnic minorities are accelerating in growth across the world. And in the US alone, the buying power of people who identify as Black, Asian, Hispanic, and Native American is increasing exponentially, and have a combined spend which has reached over 4.4 trillion in the US alone. And again, the same principle applies here. These individuals want to be doing business with companies where they can see themselves, where they can see themselves fitting in, and where they can see that there's an alignment with their values. So really, really important, as you can see, to make sure that we're thinking about and being thoughtful about our workforce and seeing how much they need to be diverse. So Brian, I'm going to transfer it over to you to talk about some of the things that we can control.
Yes, no, Sue, that meeting people where they are is super important. But companies can do things to meet people where they are, and also to enable their companies to thrive. There are some statistics on the slide here from McKinsey that I really love, because when we speak about the business imperative, it matters deeply. And what this slide is basically saying is companies that engage in strategies and tactics in the area of racial and ethnic diversity have a 36% greater chance to outperform their peers. And if they do that, same sort of emotion with regard to gender diversity, it's 25%. Now, a lot of people will say those numbers seem really large, but think about this. If you were to cut them in half, 18% and 12.5%, what would we do to give ourselves that level of competitive advantage in our industries? We do a lot. And arguably, without writing another line of code, but if we did write that line of code by that inclusive group, it would even be better. That said, this isn't something where you can lean in when you want to and choose not to, because that's the bottom statistic there, which basically says that if you do not engage in racial, ethnic, or gender inclusion activities, you have a 29% chance to be in that bottom left quadrant where we don't want to be. So those are very, very important. And when you add and know about the correlation and see the correlation between this movement towards inclusion in innovation, in employee engagement, in employee retention, all things that inure benefit to the top and bottom lines, you see that businesses will thrive greater when they engage in more diverse and inclusive practices. So that's sort of the why, you should do it. I mean, certainly, nice to have. Human beings only do nice things up to a point, but thriving, all of us thriving and moving forward is super important. So let's speak about how do you take advantage of that and gain that competitive advantage. So at UKG and over the last few years, I've watched a lot of companies, I've done a lot of experiments as an engineer, as I said before. There are really three fundamental things that I think a company needs to do to be successful. And there are variations of it based on the type of company that you are. But overall, you need to establish this topic as a business imperative. Again, people will only do things up to a point, or nice things up to a point, but that limit to thriving is significantly greater. And in this area, this is where, depending on the type of company, where you want to not only engage in all of these activities, but you want to also, if you have the opportunity, to become a thought leader. And that's some of the things that we're doing at UKG. We happen to be in the HCM and WFM space. So that enables, people do expect us in our platform, as well as the way we engage them, to be thought leaders. And there's some opportunities that we have in actually building product and instantiating some of this logic into there. Also, your salespeople have face-offs with all of your great customers. And if they understand this topic very deeply, and we know those customers are on a similar journey, they can engage those customers and you can meet them not at the transactional level, but much deeper. So that is some of the things. Thought leadership is super key in that area. The next one, and this one is really, hopefully it speaks to you. We need the same operational rigor as we have in any other part of our business of import in this area of belonging, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what does that look like? Well, number one, that looks like what gets measured gets done. So having goals and articulating and being very transparent about those goals. Having accountability within your company to those goals, where your leaders having scorecards is really important as well. Having transparency, not only transparency, but governance at every level. So not only at the global level, having your most senior leaders engaged and accountable to this topic, but having an operational rhythm like you do with finance. All of our financials, we look at them every single month. Our sales results, we look at them every single month. And we look at all of the drivers of how we will improve. If something is not right, we engage to correct it. So those are all the things that are really important in this operational framework. If you have that level of rigor, you will be better. If you have the data, you will get better. And last but not least, I would argue that the first two columns speak more to the top down and the importance from the top down, but the bottoms up is just as important. And by providing that foundation of success, we mean there's really three big things that you can do. Number one, and we'll speak more deeply in a few minutes about it, is the foundational learning. I didn't say training. Training is very compliant in nature. Everybody wants to learn, and you can be a continuous learner. So allowing and providing curriculum around these topics, which we'll go deeper into, is very, very important. Also important is empowering your employees. You have diversity networks. That's what we call them here. You have employee resource groups. You have business resource groups. These are the biggest advocates, and they represent, they're a proxy for all the intersectionality in your company. So by empowering them and in positioning them for business impact is really important. And Sue's going to talk a little bit about how to even take that to the next level in a couple of minutes. So If we do all these things well, what I found companies that do these well, and we're all at different journeys, but if you focus and master these, you will be successful. So Sue, why don't you talk about one of those areas in the thought leadership area?
Yes, absolutely. So sales enablement. So as we've talked about, this topic is impacting our business. It's impacting our bottom line. And the majority of our customers, your customers, are all on the same journey. And so while all of us may look a little bit different from one another based on where we are in the journey, it does matter to all of us for sure. And it's important to show who we are to our customers. And if you're in a position to develop a formal program, building out a sales enablement program will not only support your sales organization, understanding the topic more deeply, and be able to speak authentically about the topic to their customers, but also will show your customers who you are, which is really the important piece here. And for us at UKG, we feel that by empowering our sales teams, we are definitely creating an advantage, a differentiator. And so to support our program, we want to make sure that we're building out an infrastructure that will enable our sales teams to thrive. And so an important part of that build out is a BD&E sales portal where there'll be lots of assets for our sales teams to leverage to really get comfortable with this topic. So some of these tools will be videos, there'll be messaging guides, a customer deck, playbook, some overview guides, success stories, just to name a few. So really want to build that resource for them to go to. We'll also be educating our sales teams on how to conduct account intelligence on where their customers are in the journey. And this might sound simple, but it really is sometimes like a mini research project. And we don't want our sales teams just going in there understanding where UKG is on the journey, but we really want them to understand where their customer is on the journey. That's really, really important because then they can understand the similarities. They can also see some potential gaps with the customer that they could bring up in the conversation. So tracking who we are speaking to and when is another important step. Sometimes the conversations will start out as a best practice sharing and end there, and that is absolutely okay. But many end up going further. Our customers want to talk deeper on a particular topic. So it's important that we're tracking so that we can see where the conversation is going. And then we want to make sure that we're tracking it in our CRM system because we want to be sure to be able to tie our influence to opportunities and wins so that we can prove out to the folks inside our organization how much this ties to the bottom line. So really, really important. And just a quick little story here. At my previous company, we had a really large customer who was looking to outsource their entire infrastructure. So they came in and met with our CEO and other leaders at our executive briefing center. It was a really, really big meeting. And because that sales rep was educated in our diversity and inclusion sales enablement program, he invited our chief diversity officer, who was Brian at the time, into the conversation. So Brian had a seat at the table. And it was a huge, huge influence because the decision maker that was a part of the deal on the customer side was a Black female. And seeing the programs and initiatives that we had around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging was something that spoke to her. It was the differentiator for her. And seeing Brian at the table. So we ended up winning that deal. It was a $1.2 billion deal, the biggest deal that we had ever won at Dell Technologies. So really, really huge win for us. And we were really, really pumped and excited about it. So lots of excitement around sales enablement programs. So if you're able to build out a formal one, I would absolutely highly recommend it.
Great point, Sue. And I want to get back to, again, the concept of foundational learning. Again, I didn't say training because people think of training as compliant. And this journey, is ever going, and we must get better every day. So I wanted to share a little bit about what are the aspects of such a foundational learning that we found have been successful. Number one, you need to demystify what do belonging, diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. They mean many different things to many different people because people have different life journeys. So having an immersive experience where you actually discuss these terms, how they show up in society, how they show up in business, and then how topics like mentorship and allyship and sponsorship play in and how everyone can lean in to support it. So having an intellectual, honest, and leveling conversation about what these things mean is the beginning of the journey. Next, and just as important, is to speak about unconscious bias. Now, we all are biased. In fact, unconscious bias is a brain science matter. Our brains do things for us that help protect us, and we move towards safety, we move towards likeness. But the challenge with unconscious bias when you're dealing with this topic is that we look at social stereotypes if our lived experiences don't tell us what we're looking at and who we're experiencing. And as we well know, social stereotypes are far off. And so learning what that bias is, how do we interrupt that bias so that we can be more inclusive all the time? The third and equally as important is language matters around here and microaggressions. I have one at least once a day, and I'll test this. When's the last time when you walked in a meeting or walked in a room and said, hey guys? Well, number one, not everybody identifies as a guy. They don't identify as a gal. They might be non-binary. That is what we call an example of a microaggression. Not anything intentional, but our words matter. And even though someone may not ever talk and speak to us and call us out on it, it starts to build, or they won't be seen, or they might not trust us as much because we don't see them where they are. So that's important. And last but not least, absolutely speaking about privilege and inequity. And I didn't say white privilege. We're all privileged. We're listening to this webcast today because we're alive. There's a bunch of people who didn't even make it up and wake up this morning. So we all have privilege. And in the context of privilege and inequity, how does it play out in society? How does it play out in the workplace? How do we use privilege as a superpower to lean in to advocate for others? We all have that ability. And if we all lean in for one another, we can deal with some of the, worst case, the socioeconomic disparity where it exists in all of the world. It's not just black, it's not just white, it's not just the US. It is socioeconomic disparity. The have and the have-nots is the biggest thing that separates us, and we can bridge that gap. So I hope that helps in speaking about it. And I spoke about earlier about something you can go beyond diversity networks, and Sue has been the architect of an amazing program at the last company and this one. Sue, you want to speak about the ambassador program?
Absolutely. And so there are likely people in your company who are super passionate about the DEI&B topic and want to be speaking about it. They want to be speaking internally, externally. They're super passionate. And they also want to be representing all that your company is doing from a DEI&B perspective. However, they don't necessarily have a cohort or resources to leverage. And some of them may think actually that they understand the strategy and go on and speak about it, but in fact, it may not align with the full vision of the strategy. So creating an ambassador program, you'll be able to provide them with a structured program with tools, tips, and a cohort to empower them to make sure that they are able to lead from the front. So at UKG, we look at this community of ambassadors as an extension of the BD&E team who can speak to our fellow UCrewers, our customers, our partners, prospects, and other individuals in our ecosystem. And a great benefit of being an ambassador is you not only get to experience our foundational learning, as Brian was speaking about earlier, but they will really be the ambassadors who will model that inclusive leadership. They will be able to be there for other UCrewers and help them along their journey, help them to embrace and activate an inclusive mindset and environment. So really, really great benefit here. And the ambassadors will also be asked to speak at all hands, at staff meetings, at regional events, customer briefings, and conferences. They truly are the voice of BD&E, amplifying the stories and messages. And so those who are part of the program will naturally be able to go deeper on topics when they're having the conversations because they're having their own experiences, which will be extremely valuable as they're speaking to various stakeholders. So for example, through experiencing programs like the foundational learning, they're going to have their own aha moments. It will impact them. Now, next time they're talking about the topic, it will be more authentic because they weren't just learning about it, they were actually experiencing it. So it sure will take on a new meaning when they're having those conversations about DEI&B. And of course, with any program, there are requirements. We want to make sure that of course they're actively participating in the foundational learning. They are being those So they are modeling that leadership. We want to make sure that they're actively participating in our diversity networks. Brian spoke about that a little bit earlier. That is a really important role here, our diversity networks. And then making sure they're able to present on the BD&E strategy. Since they will be out there and being the voice, we want to make sure that they're 100% comfortable with that. And then a couple last things that I wanted to just mention. We're going to be offering a subset of ambassadors who are really active ambassadors above and beyond to go a little bit further. So we're going to be bringing in a third-party certification as part of the program, where those subset of ambassadors can go through, they can go deeper, they will be more skilled on the topic of DEI&B. So really excited about that role. And then being an ambassador will not only allow the individuals to be recognized internally and externally, but it's going to give them increased exposure to folks that they're not normally around in their day job. So a lot of opportunity there. Certainly expertise in DB&I, and then receiving those extra rewards and badges will be really important for that as well. So I know we've just spent a lot of time going over a lot of various topics. Hopefully you found this really valuable. But Brian and I thought we would take a little bit of a different approach for our second half of our time with you all, and have a fireside chat to go a little bit deeper. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Brian some questions, and then we'll have a good conversation.
Awesome.
That sound good, Brian?
That sounds awesome. Love it. Love it.
Great. Okay. Well, we just spoke a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. How would you differentiate between diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging?
Yeah, this is, as I said earlier, in the foundational learning, this is an area where it's fundamental to understand this, so you can have the conversations and be speaking apples to apples. I call them intellectually honest conversations. Not that we have to agree with one another, but can we at least speak about the same things? And so when you think about diversity, I think of diversity, Sue, as the range of human differences, including but not limited to the intersections of diversity that we all know, whether that's race, ethnicity, gender identity, ability, age, and I spoke about it at the end, socioeconomic status. When you think about equity, it's the notion of having a fair and impartial opportunity within an organization or a system at large. Now, when you move to inclusion, it's really an act. It's the act of creating an environment where all individuals, and I mean all, and they feel welcome, supported, and valued. And then the ultimate one is belonging, and that's really where you have a sense of relatedness and connectiveness to a positive relationship or a set of relationships within a group or an organization. So Berna Myers, who's phenomenal, sort of my role at Netflix, a great author here, I think you probably heard her statement where she said diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. Well, I would like to extend that and have extended it, because belonging is being asked to dance to your favorite song. You know how that feels. You can be at the party, but they ask you to dance and it's not your song, Sue, and it's like, oh, I'm dancing, but you're not into it. You want to dance like no one's watching. And then equity is being given the opportunity to host the next party, because the person who hosts the party, they're the in crowd. So if you put those four together, I hope that helps as an example for the group here.
Yeah, we need to make a sign with those four things. I love that addition. Okay, so, when we think about the work that we're doing, it certainly requires influencing others at all different levels of the organization. But thinking about leadership, how do you, Brian, engage the UKG's leadership to be a part of the DEI&B journey with us, especially when most of the leadership is made up of majority demographic? And who do want to help, they just may not know what to do, how to get involved. And when they ask, what do you tell them?
Well, this question in my mind speaks to a fundamental reality regarding whether a DEI and B will ultimately be seen as a topic that will, exist for a fleeting moment, as topics do at times, or a topic that will be a sustained movement, which we need it to be. So ultimately, for the latter to happen, you need to have the majority, whatever that is in the particular situation, deeply engaged and invested in the DEI and B outcomes. For me, the best place to start is in that area of foundational learning, like we spoke about. And why that's important for leaders, certainly senior leaders who might be from the majority, is many of these topics, Sue, will be new or in some cases even foreign to a number of leaders. And therefore they'll be uncomfortable because it's really weird. As leaders, you're most comfortable when you're in control and when you're seen as a subject matter expert. And if you're not on this topic, you'll tend to shy away or create an environment where it's not important. So as such, it is very important that we create environments for this continued and sustained learning. Again, not training, I keep hitting on that. It's learning in these areas of DEI and B. Because without that fundamental and foundational knowledge and the ability to get comfortable with these topics, again, it'll be very hard for leaders to engage and to know where they can lean in and they'll learn from others. But in parallel to that, so in a leader's mind, something they do know is you have to continue to hammer what we said before, the business imperative, the fact that this topic is correlated with greater innovation, higher employee engagement, higher retention. And these are results that all great leaders are looking for. So net for me, we need to redefine leadership in terms of inclusive leadership.
I love that, Brian. And, I've seen, the leaders go through and managers go through and have those uncomfortable moments. But it almost seems like the more they have those uncomfortable moments, even though they're going to be going into more uncomfortable moments, they start to get comfortable with the uncomfortable moments, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Have you seen that happen as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of these things that the shift that I see when it hits is when someone would take it out of the context of business and they actually bring it home with them. And some of these foundational learnings, it's the leader who finally, what they're hearing, they recognize that their loved ones at home are experiencing this world much differently as well. And they didn't realize it before. You go on as leader, you just move forward, you do what you need to do. But once it becomes personal for you, that you're on a personal journey, that's going to actually enable not only others that are part of your UCrew family here, but those in your family. So I've seen some big moves forward when individuals said, I came home and I spoke to my wife and I spoke to my daughters, and I was apologetic at first, but they were also very excited that I'm leaning in and learning about this world that they're experiencing, which is much different than the world that I experience.
Yeah. Just gave me chills. Love it. And so when we think about, many companies out there, we see, DEI and B becoming something that they're talking about often. Some companies are certainly prioritizing it at the top, but some are not. Some think they're prioritizing it, but it's kind of buried in the middle of prioritization. It's not at the business level. So from your perspective, Brian, why must companies, and this is both B2B and B2C, why do you feel they should prioritize DEI and B as a core priority for the business at the top?
Well, we spoke about it earlier. We shared some of those statistics about if you do, what happens, and if you don't, what happens. And what's common to, hopefully all companies, we want to thrive. And if we understand that connection between diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and thriving, given again, it drives greater innovation, it retains their best employees, it'll allow them also, as you spoke earlier, to meet their customers where they are. To the degree you spoke about the example of the deal at our last company where we won it, transactionally, I'm pretty sure it was a pretty close selection process, but the differentiation came when people saw us equaling to their values. So because people, customers, all of us, we want to do business with companies that understand us and share our values, because that makes us feel connected. And when things go wrong in your company, guess what happens? If it's just a transaction, they'll go very wrong. Last thing you want is legal involved. But if you have trust and you share values, the point is we will get there together. And if people have that level of trust, you can have what we call at UKG, customers for life. So all these demographics matter, and they happen in your customer base. All these demographics are in your customer base. The more you're on this journey, the more you're going to connect with them and thrive.
Yep. Yeah, and I think seeing it at that top priority level, I mean, it just shouts volumes to your employees, right? It just says, okay, this is an important criteria, and those that aren't on board will absolutely need to jump on board because it is at that level of prioritization.
Yeah, simply put, the way we think about it, Sue, I know you think this way as well. This isn't something you do. It has to be who you are. And if it's who you are, you care deeply about it every day. If it's something you do, it raises and lowers in priority all the time. We don't do that at a fundamental level. We always will raise up for things that are tied to who we are.
Right, right. And so it can't just be a priority. We have to make sure that we're actually measuring it. And we often say here, I know, Brian, you say it all the time, what gets measured gets done. But we have to be thoughtful about what we are measuring. And so how do organizations redefine diversity benchmarks beyond just measuring that demographic data that is typical? For example, what is the most effective way for us to accurately look at measuring employees' sense of belonging within the workplace?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. This is one of the ones that, again, going back to an engineer, when I looked at the space, a lot of companies, the first thing they obviously measure are the diversity demographics, and that's the D, right? And whether it's global gender is a common measurement, as well as in the US, many measure ethnicity. More evolved companies start to the degree that their team members and want to identify on a number of different levels, including being differently abled, including how they, non-binary definitions of their identity, including generations, including a number of other elements, veteran status or not. But those you can measure if you can count it. Now, I think that's one that's important, but not sufficient. Sufficient is when you actually go deeper and you actually have to measure sentiment. And that's where measuring belonging, inclusion, and equity come in. Many of us have, we call it our UKX survey. I'm sure you pulse, hopefully, your employees all the time. But I would say there are 10 top questions I would add if you don't already have them. If you ask your team members, a question like, do you feel like you belong? Does your company value this topic as a business imperative? Are they comfortable being themselves? Are they comfortable expressing their opinion? Does their manager or leader value their diverse perspective? Are promotions made fairly? Do they have the same opportunities as other colleagues? Does their manager or anyone in the company advocate for them in a very formal way, either as a mentor or a sponsor? And then that one, our ERG is valued, because if they're valued, that's the proxy again to all of the intersections. So if those things are asked and you have that subjective data, which becomes objective when you measure it, along with where you are in your diverse demographics, those two things together can be very powerful with moving your strategies forward.
Love that. And certainly when employees see and understand that these measures are tied to goals and scorecards, again, they just really, really see the value and see how the company is embracing this topic, not just as a nice to have, but a must have for the business.
Everything else in our company of import to, we measure it. We don't leave it to chance. And this has to be seen in the same way from that operational point of view.
Love that. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears just a tad. Almost a year and a half ago, we had the horrific murder of George Floyd. And since then, there's been not just a greater public awareness of racial injustice, but a movement really by employees to ask for or simply demand that their company, leadership respond to and condemn racial and other, really gross examples of social injustice or systemic racism. And, we've seen many companies make statements about Black Lives Matter. Some have come out with positions about, the rise in Asian hate crimes and many other areas. And so as a leader in DEI and B, when do you know, Brian, to lean in and on what topics? Because there are so many of them.
I get this question a lot. In fact, in the community that I exist as a diversity officer, this is the toughest one, because all of companies are dealing, and a lot of these individuals are trying to work with their CEOs and other senior executives to figure out, where do you land on these things? As you know, what I've come up with and when I thought about it is there's a lot of things you can do as an individual, and you should. as an individual. You should vote. You should rightfully protest. You should do things that makes sense for you in moving social justice forward. But as a company, it gets a little tricky because it'd be very hard. Every day there's something going on in this world that you can actually lean into. And we hear it from our UCrewers. So this engagement curve, so think of it as a bell-shaped curve. And on the far left, I put the zero-sum game mindset. And there are individuals, and again, not me, but they exist, who really think that the world is a true meritocracy. What I have, I've earned. But what's really going on behind there in my experiences is if I give to you, you've taken from me, and I won't let that happen. So I will build arguments around it. That's not an area, as a company, quite honestly, moving those folks would be very difficult. On the extreme other side, think of it as the far right of that curve, smaller percentage of people as well, is what I call the extreme activists. And those are folks, again, activism is great, but when it's like you just want to go in and at its extreme, it sometimes shows up that, hey, your ancestors did something to my ancestors, and it doesn't matter what you do or say, there's nothing you will do to prove to me that you want to advocate, and I'll trust you advocating for me. Again, a very, very hard group, and the companies can't really operate in that mode. So I call it the influenceable middle. It's that I tell our leaders, get comfortable with the 85% folks, and that's really moving people from awareness to advocacy. That's what you want. And when I say advocacy, that's not advocacy in one direction. That's multi-directional advocacy. Sue, when I advocate for you, I want to learn from you and your difference so that I can advocate within my circles for you. And I hope you learn from me so you'll do the same. And together we all rise. So I think of it as if you can stay towards that influenceable middle and certainly lean in on topics that make sense for you as a company, that are in your areas of business interest, but going too far to the left or right sort of gets companies in trouble.
Yeah, and Brian, I had put on my, my a bit about me slide, coming to conversations with curiosity and openness, I truly believe can really make big changes in this world. If we truly all authentically come to the conversation, like I want to learn more about you. I am curious about your background. I'm curious what your experiences have been, and being open to accepting what those experiences have been and not shutting down anything. Absolutely, you will be moved. And so I really believe wholeheartedly in that, and that can really, really help lift us all up together.
Fully agree.
So this next question, so this is a two-part question, but certainly related. So inclusion and innovation are critical to, a company's growth and overall success. But, when we think about communicating to our broader company and linking between inclusion and innovation, how do we do that at UKG? And then, when you think about, if you can give an example of how do you make it clear that inclusion really is the engine that fuels innovation, and without it, growth is short term.
Yeah, I learned this a while back, as an engineer. SAP, I'll give them a shout out. We're really big on design thinking, and I got deep into design thinking, got certified in design thinking. It just gave me a different way to think out of the box. And the fundamentals of design thinking, Sue, are really doing everything necessary to have empathy for the very person that you want to solve the problem for. As an example, I'll give an extreme example. Who do you think is going to solve hunger in this world? Someone who's never missed a meal, or someone who's been starving every day? I'd bet on the latter every day. Why? They're the closest to the problem. The rest of us are, guessing and thinking from our own perspective. But if you've never had the perspective of being hungry or starving, it's very hard to believe you're going to come up with the right solution for it. So I give that as a broad example. And as you said, what are we doing? Is you must have diverse teams. If you're trying to solve problems for diverse people, you must have a representative set of that mindset in your team. Because if you don't have that, you're going to miss solving the problem that needs to be solved. And that is why innovation happens. It's not like there's a lot of great innovation happens. And when's the last time you said you saw something like, oh my God, that's not rocket science, I could have done that? The missing link is you didn't have someone in that group that was closer to that problem. And that person would have known exactly what needed to do. And those companies that have embraced all of these differing thoughts and brought those to the table have brought innovation that were game changing. And I've done that a lot before. Certainly as an engineer at SAP, we thought of our sports and retail solutions because we were design thinking experts. We're doing it soon now in UKG as we think about instantiating this logic inside of our product, because our product, HCM WFM, serves all. So we must have teams from all perspectives that are innovating, knowing that the solutions that we're providing are going to touch in a very positive way so many more people that we serve.
Absolutely. And I had spoken a little bit about the innovation that I saw happen with the diversity that we had in the marketing programs that I was managing at Dell. And I was completely blown away. And they were working on big projects for Michael Dell and his executive team. And the innovation, the ideas that came out of this, that the executives implemented, they used, they brought on, they were blown away. It just, when you have that different mindset, it's amazing to see what happens. And I know, you are a model around, design thinking. You've brought that into our team. And when we are thinking about ideas, it allows everybody to have a voice. And again, everybody learns so much more with that perspective. So, okay, so when we talked a little bit about our employees and earlier in the first half of our conversation, and so we can leverage our employees in so many ways to help move the needle on DEI and B efforts, so many ways. And so what are some of the ways that you think that we can best use our employees to help us in this effort?
Well, you spoke a lot about it beautifully about having a formal ambassador program and what that could do when you have your most engaged individuals sort of leading these discussions and leading your company through what it needs to be led through. Diversity networks and ERGs, as I said earlier, are a great place to engage team members. And I made a statement about having them and positioning them for business impact. Why is that? And what does that look like? Well, number one, as we said, they're actually a proxy to all of your customers. If you have a growing base of ERGs, they actually, all of their intersections equal what the intersections for your customers. So why wouldn't you involve them in business impactful activities like talent acquisition, like the branding for your company, like we spoke about earlier, innovation efforts if it made sense in your company? They should also be places where leadership development happens. We all are constrained with the number of top talent that can be in our best programs, but employee resource groups or diversity networks or BRGs are the perfect place for people to hone skills, because if they're formal and they're business impactful, there's a lot of things that happen in those networks that are building muscle in areas that should be considered when you're looking at succession planning and promotion planning. So I think that's how employees want to show up. And if you position them to impact the company, they'll even show up more, and more people will want to be in them.
Excellent, excellent. All right, I'm going to jump to the next question because I know we only have a few more minutes left. So, earlier we talked about the importance of measuring. What we measure gets done. So how can organizations leverage technology? There seems to be so much out there to make sure they're measuring the authenticity and success of a company's having and with the DEI and B efforts.
Well, just for grins, I went out because sort of when I got formally into the space, your LinkedIn blows up with all kinds of folks, one to sell you this, one to sell you that. So I actually formally looked for some research, Sue, and Mercer and Red Thread, and this is circa 2019, they actually wrote a paper. And at that time, there were 105 solutions, various solutions ranging from reducing bias in the talent acquisition process all the way through ensuring equity and employee development, everything in between that existed. I looked back at Red Thread, they just updated it last month, and there's now over 200 companies in the space. So it's almost overwhelming. So I believe the best practice is to pick solutions that support your existing strategies and accelerate or augment them. Certainly not chilling for our company, but we're in this business. And as we think about instantiating that logic into the platform, we're doing it with the mindset that's going to help our customers accelerate towards their DEI journey. So lots of stuff out there, do your research, but don't become overwhelmed. Really start slow and pick things that are really going to accelerate existing great strategies.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to have this be our last question here, Brian. You know, you just mentioned Mercer, certainly an expert in this area, and there's lots of experts in this area. So how do organizations strike the right balance between utilizing internal and external DEI and B resources?
Yeah, this is an important one, Sue. So going back to, again, if you believe that the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging are business impactful, are of strategic import, then you need to treat them the same way you do other strategic topics of import. So in companies, what do? When we are considering outside resources, we typically are trying to leverage expertise to either inform or augment our existing capabilities. So the same thought needs to exist with regards to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, in my opinion, meaning you bring in specific experts to help accelerate your journey, but do not fully outsource the capabilities. A lot of companies said, well, we need to bring in somebody to fix it. No, this is who you are. It's core to your journey. It's core to the DNA of your company. So you need to augment. You need to build core capabilities inside in order to accelerate. You then bring in experts. So I think that that's the natural happy balance, because you need to sustain this over time, as I said earlier, not just have it be a moment in your company.
Excellent. You know what? I'm going to squeeze one more last question in here because I think we have time.
Oh,
I think we can do it. So, you know, we spoke earlier about the important role of our customers that our customers play in our DEI and B strategy. You know, can you just double click on how B2B organizations tap their customers, how they can tap their customers and partner networks to expand on the impact that DEI and B can have?
That's funny. When I think of DEI and B, somebody saying, well, how would you think of it? I said, I think of it as a global contact sport. It's global as the topic pertains to everyone. It's a contact sport because you can't be passive. You have to engage, and it's a sport because winning matters. We spoke about that. So if you really think about this as a continuous journey, it's really it's valuable and invaluable to engage others who are on a similar journey. This isn't an area where we should be competing. We might, if we're more inclusive, we might win more talent. But I would say spread the net wide. People who are on the journey, companies who are on the journey, engage them, learn their best practices, because if we do that, it will benefit everyone. And if it benefits everyone, it means there's more opportunity for all of us. So that's how I would answer that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, this has been so much fun doing this conversation with you, Brian. I really appreciate your perspective and insights. I'm glad we got a chance to share it with so many others out there. I get the good fortune of hearing it day in and day out. So I'm blessed for that, but glad we could share it with the broader audience. So thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Onward and upward.